Hi and welcome to another ink review. My name's Michael and today we're looking at Diamine ink and that ink is their Prussian blue. Now I normally really like the Diamine inks. They're normally really well behaved and they're normally very well saturated and they look great on the page. This one I'm going to say from the outset I'm not entirely in love with. It comes in the usual size bottles. This is the 80 milliliter bottle, which retails for around the $15 mark online, and perhaps a little more if you buy it in some stores, particularly here in Australia. It's a sort of, I suppose you could say, dusty blue, and it's not a particularly well saturated ink. To get that much colour on the card required quite a saturated cotton bud. So in most pens it doesn't really pop much, and that might appeal to some people, but for me it just doesn't have a huge amount of sort of vibrancy. As you can see from my sort of fake chromatography, there's not really a huge amount going on. There's some interesting lighter blues in the bottom, which I really do actually quite like, but then sort of that washed out dusty blue really doesn't do anything for me, and then you get a couple of little bits of darker blue right at the top, and that's sort of the way it appears on the page as well. Let's look at the written tests that I've done. So here it is on Rhodia 80 gram paper, and you can see it is quite a sort of almost a grey blue. I personally was hoping for something a little closer to say the Noodler's 54th Massachusetts, or you know, a sort of a decent sort of light blue black, but this is sort of a grey blue. I think it was designed to emulate the colours of the Prussian army or something like that, but as you can see, the first bit of writing there is done with the Lamy Broad, the Safari here, so it's not hugely saturated because this is a pen that does generally tend to lay down quite a lot of ink. Not a wet pen, but you know, it gives you a good idea. And you can even see from the Lamy Medium and the Extra Fine that it's pretty flat. There's some shading, and when there is shading, it's actually really quite cool. But it's just there's just so little of it. The Flex pen gives a nice sort of darker blue, which is quite appealing. But yeah, the general sort of writing, it's just a little bit too washed out for my taste. The water resistance test was actually sort of interesting. You're able to keep some of the detail, which is more than you can say for some inks and even some Diamine inks. It's certainly not permanent. There's no, you can still sort of read it, but that's about it. So saturation, I have to say, is sort of low. Shading is medium. When it's there, it's quite cool, but I think the contrast is just too great. The sort of the washed out blue grey versus the sort of darker blue grey. Sheen, yeah, I've found a couple of bits like on Tomoe River where if you put down heaps and heaps of ink, you get some sheen, but otherwise there's really none. The flow I don't find to be particularly pleasant with this ink. It's okay, but it's almost like there's just not quite enough dye in the ink for it to flow from the pen smoothly. Dry time, as the water content would suggest, is really slow. It actually surprised me. It's 35 to 40 seconds on the Rhodia paper. You know, but as a result of all of this, of course, the cleaning of the ink is fairly good. Let's look at it on some other paper. So first we have the Tomoe River 52. Once again, that sort of washed out blue grey is quite apparent. This is where you do get a little bit of that sheen, but I tend to lay down a lot of ink to get that to happen. So yeah, it's okay. Dry time of 40 to 45 seconds. But on these two sort of upper level papers, if you will, there's virtually no bleed. Even where we lay down a huge amount of ink, I think the saturation is just sort of so low, the Flex did barely anything. But yeah, no bleed and no feathering on those papers. We get it onto the Reflex copy paper 80 GSM, the standard copy paper. Once again, laid down a lot of ink to try and get something to happen on that swab, but it just sort of looks weird. It sort of has absorbed into the paper. You know, the water is absorbed so strongly it sort of almost looks dimpled or something. Dry time of 20 to 25 seconds, and still sort of relatively clean on the back. On the cheaper Reflex copy paper, we get a few tiny hints of feathering, but really not enough to say that it feathers. Like you can see on the swab there that there's there's a little bit of feathering, but that was a lot of ink laid down, and there's a little bit on the D in seconds there, but not terrible, I suppose. Dry time of 5 to 7 seconds, and still not a huge amount of bleed. A couple of little bits where it pulled, but you've got to expect that on paper like this. So let's look at the score I've given this ink. So colour-wise, I've given it a 2. It just does nothing for me. I'm sure there are people there around that really love it. In the darker shades, it's an interesting colour, but there's so much of the washed out, flat, grey blue that it just sort of, it's just a little bit too dull for my personal taste. Performance a 3. That sort of flow issue seems to be a bit of a problem. Like this railroaded in pens that I didn't expect to do. I tried this in a number of pens. I tried it in a Faber-Castell Loom, which is traditionally quite a wet nib. I tried it in a Platinum 3776, which was, it almost looked grey in that pen. I tried it in a number of Lamy nibs, of course, and I also tried it in the Visconti Michelangelo, and even that, which is a fairly wet pen, it didn't bring out any shading, and it did tend to railroad sort of in that pen, so there does seem to be some sort of flow issue with the ink there. X Factor I've given a 1. There's really nothing that jumps out about this ink. It's not like it's a really vibrant shading ink, or it's got an incredible colour or sheen or anything like that. It's a pretty straight up blue-grey. Value, of course, these Diamine bottles are really good value, particularly at that sort of size. 80 mils for less than, sort of 30 mils of a lot of other inks, even other budget inks you can't sometimes buy for this sort of price. So an overall score of 2.5 out of 5. It's probably a decent ink for people who do artwork with pens, or water brushes and things like that. You get some interesting shading or colour effects from that, but for general writing, it's just a little bit too light on the page. It behaves well, like there's no bleeding or feathering to really mention, and it cleans well, but that's not why we use these inks. We use them for the writing or the image on the page. So that was Diamine Prussian Blue. If you like this video and found it helpful, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the notifications button if you'd like to keep up to date with the videos that I produce. And please feel free to send me a message. If you've got any pens or inks that you'd like me to look at, or any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. So, in the meantime, enjoy your pens, enjoy writing, and I'll see you later.